and welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Grace. Every week, we like to share our glows or grows or both from the week, from our real lives. So, Sierra, do you have a glow or a grow to share?
I think my grow at this time in the term would be just trying to work towards maybe managing my workload a little bit better so that as I'm getting end of term tired, I'm not setting myself up for failure. I think it's really hard in my context. All of our projects for almost all of our year groups are submitted in the final week of the term because they're kind of that project-based learning. We're doing a unit across 10-ish weeks. And so all of the bulk of my marking tends to fall just before the holidays. So yeah, I think a grow for me at the moment with just a few days of school left to go. A grow for me at the moment would be just to work towards managing, my end of term expectations of myself, knowing that I do get really tired. And how can I maybe better avoid some procrastination?
Yeah, I heavily relate to that. I was very end of term tired because my school actually finished a week before Sierra's school. So it's more exciting for me. But yeah, I related to the end of term tired. I was like, no one talk to me. Don't even look at me. I don't want to hear Miss Keane ever again. I just want to hole up in my room and never speak to another human being. So I get you.
Yeah. Like sometimes this week, I've literally just been walking around the classroom and just like bend down because I feel like I can't stand up anymore.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole new level. Oh, dear.
Just exhaustion. So anyway, yeah, but thankful for the holidays arriving and some time to recover.
So thankful for the holidays and time to recover. My goodness.
What's yours?
So pretty much everyone in my life who's asked me how I'm going lately has heard about this. And I'm very excited because I am learning how to crochet, which was actually Sierra's suggestion. She was like, Grace, I think you need a hobby. And I was like, probably.
Other than podcasting.
Yes, other than podcasting. As a general like well-being thing. And I agreed wholeheartedly with that assumption. And I am loving the art of crochet. It's fantastic. It's super fun. I am currently holding a dinosaur like plushie that I made myself that turned out way bigger than I thought it was going to be because my intention when making this, I've started a project of creating little crocheted dinosaurs for my kindy class for their Christmas presents because I've literally never crocheted before in my life until a couple of weeks ago. So I've given myself like 6 months to get really good at it in time for Christmas. Anyway, and I tried this pattern on a video on YouTube. So thank you so much, YouTube, for the free crochet patterns. And I was like, this dinosaur is using a lot of yarn. Like, I am really working through this entire ball of yarn. Like, are we going to end sometime soon? Like, am I going to have to spend like thousands of dollars on yarn? Because
yes. Yes, you will. Spend thousands of dollars on craft supplies. Welcome to the beginning of your journey.
And I've already kind of seen the difference between cheap craft supplies and expensive craft supplies, and you really do get what you pay for. But so I ended up with this dinosaur that is way too big to make 18 of for my class. But he does make a great little travel-sized emotional support dino. So I'm currently cuddling him. And I am super proud of myself for like creating some things. And I have 5 miniature dinosaurs that are more appropriately gift-sized sitting on my kitchen counter at the moment. And honestly, it's such a glow because it keeps my mind just busy enough that I can like actually enjoy a television show. And I'm, making something for a purpose, which is great. And eventually all the people in my life are going to be getting emotional support, crocheted animals of some description for various special occasions in their life, whether they want them or not. Be like, it's your birthday, but really this gift was for me because I wanted to make it. So that is a massive glow. And if anyone has any crochet tips, feel free to hit us up on Instagram because I know basically nothing and I am so ready to learn from the collective expertise of the art world on the internet.
She's done such an amazing job. Like, Grace has absolutely slayed her dino making goal. She was like, oh, by the end of the school holidays, I want to have made 1 dinosaur. And she's already made 5, plus this giant 6th one.
I literally, like, the Friday that was my last day of school, my yarn order arrived. And I spent that, like, a couple of hours that night on this unexpectedly large dino and then finished off the next day and then was like, oh, so that was easy. Rightio. Continue. And then, yeah, so I've made a bunch and I've shown everyone in my life like what I've done because I'm not a crafty person. I don't make things. And I really hope that my kids, when I finally give these things to them, I hope they appreciate them a little bit because they're 5. They don't know all the work that goes into it. I'm thinking the parents probably will appreciate it more. But actually the parent, there's a mum of one of the girls in my class. She actually crochets at home and has done it for a very long time and is very good. And so I'm a bit worried that she's going to judge me and be like, your technique is terrible. Anyway, yeah, so that is definitely my glow. And my next goal after I've done all the dinosaurs is to, create a cardigan because I saw a great pattern that uses the alpine stitch, which is like 17 different stitches all together and looks really complicated. So hopefully I'll be wearing an original Grace creation at some point and I'll be able to be like Sierra and someone will say, I love your cardigan. And I'll say, thanks, I made it.
That's so satisfying. There's no greater feeling. Someone said to me this week, oh, wow, I love the embroidery on your boots. And I was like, thank you. I did it. Anyway.
Oh, it's the best. Like when someone says, Grace, I love your nails. I'm like, yeah, did them myself. You know, just
Grace always does have very professional looking nails.
I have a bit of a obsession with nails. But anyway, moving on. So last episode, if you missed it, we talked about homework and the collective trauma that we have experienced as both teachers and students. And we had a look at what makes good purposeful homework. And we gave some concrete, practical tips and tricks for actually writing some good homework. And we drew quite heavily on Kathy Vaderot's work. And she is amazing. The internet calls her the queen of homework. So if you missed that, go check it out. And go check out Kathy Vaderot's book as well, because it was super, super valuable and really readable as well as busy teachers. So highly, highly recommend.
Today, we thought we'd actually spend some time looking at the NCCD. We are approaching that time of year where NCCD reporting is upon us. And if you are hearing all these acronyms like NCCD, QDTP, IEP, there's a plethora of others. It can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming, especially if it is your first year as a full-time teacher. And lots of people throw these terms around just as if everybody knows what they're talking about. And sometimes we don't. So we're going to spend a little bit of time unpacking what NCCD is, why it's important, and how we as teachers can make it as easy as possible for ourselves.
But first, it's time for tea.
Guys, today is Grace's birthday. It's so exciting. Should we sing?
No, we shouldn't.
So I am drinking a T2 French Earl Grey, which I've never tried before, in honor of Grace because it's her favorite tea. And I, as part of her birthday gift, bought a packet of this tea just to keep at my house.
It honestly made me cry.
So that when she's here, I can serve her some of her favorite tea. But I thought I should also try it myself, not because I'm going to dive into her stash, but to see what it's like. And actually, I would have prior to this said that I'm not an Earl Grey fan, but it has been growing on me of late. And this one in particular is most enjoyable. Thankfully, as a part of my birthday gift that I just also received from Grace, because we are birthday week twins.
We're only 4 days apart. It's so exciting.
She gifted me the most fantastic invention. which is like a little plug-in coaster that keeps your mug warm, because I have such a tendency to ramble and then often find that halfway through the episode my tea has gone cold and it's very disappointing. So I'm just delighted to have a hot cup of tea that has been sitting here for quite some time and it's still really warm and tasty. So thank you, Grace.
Oh, Amazon really delivered the goods for this birthday. So, I mean, we're both really happy. It's very exciting.
Mm.
And what am I drinking?
What are you drinking?
Surprise, surprise. I too am drinking my T2 Earl Grey out of my brand new mug that Sarah gifted me as part of my birthday gift. And it is just a super cute mug that is also going to live at Sierra's house. I'm here way more often than she's at my place. And I don't have any room, literally no more room in my kitchen cupboard for another mug. So it's really good that I can leave it at Sierra's house. So thanks.
You're welcome.
So let's jump into the body of this episode. I'm talking about the NCCD, which is really annoying to say because it just has one more letter than I want it to have. I just want it to have 3, 4 is too many. But it stands for Nationally Consistent Collection of Data on School Students with Disability. But the School Students with Disability part isn't even in the acronym because the acronym is not NCCD SSD. It's just NCCD. So I don't know why on the website they have the School Students with Disability bit. That annoys me so much. But anyway, because we all know that a good acronym needs to include all the words with none of these lowercase letter T's for the or anything like that. And it should make a nice word. But anyway, apparently the government didn't realize that when they named this. Doesn't matter. It's a collection of data. Thankfully, the name kind of describes what it is. It's a collection of data on reasonable adjustments that you as a classroom teacher make for the students in your class. Yeah. And according to the NCCD website, an adjustment is an action taken to enable a student with disability to access and participate in education on the same basis as other students. Yep. So adjustments are personal to the student that they involve, but they can be made at the whole school level, at a classroom level, and at an individual student level. And as part of your quality differentiated teaching practice, which is one of our other fancy acronyms, you will be making adjustments because that's just what good teachers do. And the NCCD asks you to provide evidence of that. And basically, the government uses this data to inform policy and to provide some evidence of the scope and nature of disability in our schools, to inform teachers of what they're dealing with, just to basically create a picture of disability because of the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, which is some wonderful legislation that is very much needed. And the NCCD ensures that all schools are complying with this legislation, which is really important. Thankfully, lots of the tedious reporting and submitting of evidence is done by your principal or whoever's in charge of this at your school. And this episode is going to focus on what kind of data you're collecting, how you're going to collect it, what does this all actually look like.
The idea of the NCCD model is actually quite helpful because we are professional educators, not professional legislators or lawyers, or people who are particularly familiar with like sinking their teeth into, acts and legislation. And I think the whole idea of this is the model that we're going to unpack really soon is designed to, make sure that we are complying with the legislation. And it's been created in a way that makes it really easy for us to basically check the boxes and make sure that we're doing the right thing, which is really good.
Yeah, like when I was looking at the NCCD website, they've actually made it actually really easy and logical to follow. The information's all there. Like the government isn't trying to trick you. They actually want you to do well. It's like an open book exam. And honestly, having never actually done this as a professional before, me personally, it was really easy to wrap my head around. So hopefully we will make that the case for you as well.
The census date for the NCCD data collection is usually sometime in August. So you might be hearing your schools start to talk about that now. What's really important when we are collecting data for NCCD reporting is that the data has to demonstrate evidence of actions and adjustments that have taken place for a period of at least 10 weeks in the 12 months that precede the census date. So it's actually really helpful that the census date is sort of almost mid-year or a little bit after mid-year, because it gives you a term to perhaps get to know your students if you don't know them super well, and for you to be carrying out those adjustments as you need to in your class. It also gives you a little bit of time to get on top of your registers, which we're also going to talk about in a little while, which is often where the bulk of your evidence of those adjustments that you're making lies. And then actually be able to put your hand up and say, yes, as I look at this evidence, I can see that I've made adjustments over a continuous period of 10 weeks. And so that's helpful to keep in mind as you are going through the year, making sure that you're not leaving your registers and things till the very last minute, but we'll get to that. There's a couple of phases of the NCCD. So it breaks itself down into 4 phases, which it specifies as planning, implementation, validation, and reflection. For us as classroom teachers, the first 2 are the ones that we really need to be aware of. So planning is really just the part that's sort of led by the school, or perhaps your coordinator of learning support or something similar to that effect. The person who makes sure that all the staff understand what NCCD is and what they need to do to make sure that they are upholding the expectations of that. Then implementation covers the bulk of the NCCD process, where we actually collect evidence and we make sure that the adjustments that we're making are consistent with what the student needs, and determining what level of adjustment is appropriate for that student. And that really is where us as classroom teachers sort of need to, I guess, keep our eyes open in terms of this whole process.
Phase number 3 of the NCCD is validation, which is largely led by the principal or whoever is in charge of the NCCD at your school. But it does include notifying the relevant students, parents, guardians, carers about the fact that you're collecting data. But important to note for the people you're informing and for yourself is that all of it is depersonalized. It's all completely anonymous. There are no personal details that are given to the government. It's just numbers and data, so that you can say we're providing adjustments for this many students at this level and blah, blah, blah. This is also when your principal or whoever's in charge will submit the data to the government. And then lucky last is reflection. And this is not a mandatory phase. You don't actually have to do this part if you don't want to, but there is an optional school reflection survey that is linked on the NCCD website. That's basically, how do you feel about the process? That kind of thing. I am one who loves to do surveys. So if I was the principal of my school, I would be doing it. But you as a classroom teacher don't have to worry about that, which is great.
So if we come to the actual NCCD model itself, which is really that implementation phase, there's a few different steps to guide us through the model. Grace already explained for us what an adjustment is. So it's really any change that you're making to enable a student to engage in their learning. So that is the first step, to actually identify, is there an adjustment taking place? Are you, as the classroom teacher or the school more broadly, making adjustments for a particular student? Adjustments can be made across so many different categories, and we need to really remember that the kinds of things that we might do, sometimes even without thinking, often still fall under this category of adjustments. So adjustments can be made to your planning, to the way that you teach, or the way that you're asking the student to engage with their learning. You can make adjustments to the actual curriculum, to the way that you assess a student, to the way that you report on a student, to the extracurricular activities and the way that they engage in those. You can also make adjustments to environment and infrastructure. I do remember one school I worked in had to make adjustments to their environment by going around and putting new kinds of handrails on all their stairs for a particular student who needed lower handrails, basically. And I guess that's a great example of where we can make adjustments at the whole school level, still for an individual. You can also adjust your resources, which I think a lot of us would do naturally through scaffolding and different kinds of worksheets and different ways that you're asking students to engage in learning. So there's a whole range of things that you can actually adjust and classify as an adjustment.
And this leads us very neatly into step 2 of the NCCD model, which is to determine the level of adjustment. And like Sierra was saying, lots of the adjustments that you make, you might not even realize because you're just engaging with quality, differentiated teaching practice, which is being a good teacher. And I can think of quite a few students in my class that I need to make those kind of adjustments for. And they're kind of like level 0 adjustment.
That's another one of those big acronyms that you might hear thrown around at this time of year, which is the QDTP. So that is that quality differentiated teaching practice. And I remember attending a PD one year where they were talking about differentiation, and I think differentiation was something I struggled with the most as a beginning teacher. And it was funny because I thought that I wouldn't, having worked in learning support and coming from that background. I thought, differentiation is easy, but it's so not. And there's so many different perspectives and views on how we should differentiate and what differentiation is and all of those sorts of things. But I sat through this PD, which was really helpful. And one of the things that I remember from that was that QDTP, quality differentiated teaching practice, actually benefits everyone in your class. And so when you are doing that well, and there's so many different things, we'll compile a list of a whole bunch of adjustments that you can be making that fall under that sort of level 0 QDTP type adjustments. There's so many different things you can be doing in that space that you might notice that it's needed because of a particular student, but then when you do it, you actually see that it's beneficial for everyone.
Then we move on to supplementary adjustments, which is really the first level of true NCCD relevant adjustments, which are the type that may only be required for certain activities. So there may be a student who has a physical disability who needs adjustments made for their mobility, and they don't need any additional support in terms of maybe a teacher's aid. They don't need to type instead of write. They don't need a scaffolded task. It's just when they're doing sport, they need these adjustments. That might be a supplementary adjustment because it's not in every single learning area and it doesn't affect every single subject.
Supplementary really speaks for itself in terms of these are the types of adjustments that we're just making to supplement or just add to support the student through their school and or learning experience. It doesn't really require a huge change or a massive reworking of anything. This is really just about providing the supports that are needed for a student to access and participate in their school life on the same basis as their peers.
Then we move on to level 2 adjustments, which are substantial adjustments. And the NCCD website specifies that these are required at most times and on most days. And you can consider them considerable in extent. So this might include a differentiated or scaffolded assessment. They might regularly have a TA timetable to their lessons. They might need adjusted content that is at a lower grade level. That kind of thing. So it's probably more noticeable and it affects more than just PE lessons or maths lessons. It affects most lessons at most times and on most days. And the final level of adjustment is extensive adjustments, which are defined on the NCCD website as highly individualized, comprehensive, and ongoing. And these are adjustments that occur at all times. And some examples are you have personal modifications to all courses, activities, lessons, programs, assessments. You might need to supervise them during recess and lunch. And there was actually a student that I worked with in like my first or second year of being a teaching assistant. And I was employed as like a casual TA to cover the permanent staff because this specific student had quite significant physical disability and he had some medical issues and there was a slight cognitive global delay. So basically adjustments were made to every part of his schooling life. So he couldn't use stairs. He needed the content adjusted. He needed someone to scribe for him because he couldn't write. And he was lovely and actually very helpful to me because he knew that I was learning how to be a teaching assistant. And there was one time I remember when I messed up during sport, which was the most stressful time to be a TA with this specific student because he needed adjustments for that as well and getting on and off the bus, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd left his bag somewhere and we couldn't go get it because it was locked. And I was close to tears because I was just like, I'm supposed to be a professional and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just stressed out and I haven't even been at the school for that long. And he obviously knew something was up and he said that it was okay, that I was doing a good job and I didn't need to be upset, and that almost made me cry more. But yeah, so he was absolutely lovely, but his adjustments would be classified as extensive because they happened all the time to make sure that he was able to access every part of his education, but every part of his education needed to be adjusted for him.
It's not likely that you will come across many students in a mainstream school that require extensive adjustments. It's definitely a possibility, and because we have an obligation as schools to make sure that any student who wants to come to our school is provided for and we make reasonable adjustments for them, it's definitely a possibility, but you'll certainly see more of those supplementary and substantial adjustments in a mainstream school than you would of extensive adjustments. The NCCD website mentions that this often is where we see highly specialised education facilities to really support those students who need more intensive interventions. One thing that's really helpful when you're looking over a student's IEP, and there's another one of our favourite acronyms again, IEP standing for Individualised Education Plan. Different states might have slightly different ways of saying that, but you will know what it is when you see one. And often that will specify the student's level of adjustment. So the NCCD talks about going through this process of moderation where people get together and sort of say, these are the adjustments that we think are needed or that we've been making. What level of adjustment does that, fall under? And that might be seen in real life as kind of what we might call our IEP meetings or something, where the classroom teachers and the parents and the learning support coordinators are kind of all involved in this collaborative planning meeting. And as a result of that meeting, we as the teachers are provided with this document that helps to guide our planning so that we can support that student to engage in our class with their learning. And so usually the IEP will specify that level of adjustment, and it's just helpful to understand what those different words mean: supplementary, substantial, extensive, so that it gives you an indicator as to kind of, the level of adjustment that you're going to need to put in to make sure that you're upholding your obligations to ensure that this student can engage with their learning on the same basis as everyone else in the class.
And then we move on to the category of disability that you're making the adjustments for. And there are 4 categories that the NCCD specifies, which are physical, cognitive, sensory, and social emotional, which is pretty standard. And that's literally what this step is. What is the category?
And that's another detail that you should be able to find on your IEP to give you just that little bit more insight and information into how you can best support your student. The 4th step in the model is to actually record and submit the data. Now, I've experienced this in a few different ways, working across a few different schools. Like I said, as we approach August, you're likely to be asked for your NCCD data in some shape or form. I've had situations where, as part of our sort of mid-year staff development, we've all sat down and we've had forms that we've had to fill in for each student, documenting kind of the adjustments that we make for them in that way. And that was really actually a moderation experience where, as a group, especially in a high school setting, all the teachers who were teaching that particular student. We could actually discuss together the types of adjustments that we're finding and we're making for that student and what sort of level of adjustment was most appropriate for that student. So that moderation process can actually be really helpful and is encouraged by the NCCD. Other situations I've been in have simply required me to basically confirm or deny that I make adjustments for a student and confirm that I have evidence of those adjustments. That's obviously a much quicker process because it's literally a ticker box to say, yes, I make adjustments for this student, and yes, it's documented in my program. I've then been called upon for my programs at various points to show where is my evidence of the changes and adjustments that I've made for a particular student. So there are different ways that you can do it, and I think schools will go about this depending on their needs. I know that the time where I sort of sat down as part of the big secondary staff team and we did more of a moderation type approach was really needed because we were in a period of time where we'd had a changeover in our leadership of the learning support team. And so that was actually really valuable input. So it will be a different experience for you depending on your context and depending on your school and what their expectations are. But essentially, at the end of the day, you need to record whether you're making adjustments for a student and record the adjustments that you're making. And I guess most common way of doing this is in your program. So as you're working through your unit of work and you are perhaps making annotations on that program to say the things that you changed or the things that you've modified, you can make notes on there about particular adjustments that you made at particular points in time for your students. And that is the most common way that we submit evidence of the adjustments that we're making for our students. Once we've done that, as the classroom teacher, we can hand over the responsibility of the submission of the data and we can take a deep breath and not have to worry about it anymore.
Which is why I'm so glad I'm a baby teacher. I'm entry level. There are 75 people above me in the hierarchy. It's always going to be someone else's responsibility to do the hard stuff, which I love. And the NCCD website actually has a very handy-dandy interactive data collection model quiz thing that essentially takes you through the steps of the model to see whether or not the adjustments you're making need to be reported as part of the NCCD. So it literally asks you, are you making an adjustment? And then asks you questions to get to what level of adjustment. It asks you about the category of disability and all the stuff that we've just talked about. So if you're really confused, we will link this in our show notes, but it's just on the NCCD website. And it was actually very helpful to me as someone who hasn't ever done this in real life. I was like, oh, there's a quiz I can fill out. This is so lovely. So yeah, that's just really helpful. And the website also has a plethora of case studies that are incredibly helpful if you are just beginning and have no idea what you're doing, which is me. They lay out a very detailed scenario of a fictional student that could be in primary school or high school, and they specify that. It talks about the different adjustments that the teacher is making. And then a couple that I saw actually filled out that quiz using the scenario for this fictional character, which usually led to the conclusion that, yes, the adjustments needed to be included in the NCCD. But there's so many different types of students with different types of disability, and you actually can filter these results for whether they are supplementary adjustments, substantial or extensive. You can filter for the grade. You can filter for whatever your heart desires. So that was also incredibly helpful as someone who hasn't done this before. So if you are really struggling and this is something that your school is doing right now, jump onto the NCCD website because it actually is incredibly helpful as a government website. I was really quite pleasantly surprised with how easy it was to navigate and the quality of the information it gave. Like, I didn't come away thinking I have no idea what's going on. So that's just a heads up if you feel like you need that.
The other thing that I found on the NCCD website, which is fantastic, and I had a little jump for joy, which Grace giggled at me for, was that they have professional learning materials. They have particular professional learning modules for education leaders, then for teachers in primary settings and also for teachers in secondary settings. So that is a fantastic opportunity for you to get some free PD and to make sure that you understand the NCCD, which really, if we're going to break down your role as the classroom teacher in the realm of NCCD, the first thing that you need to do is just understand what it is. So free PD on the website, we'll link it in the show notes. You should definitely do it and just make sure that you've fully wrapped your head around it.
In addition to understanding what the NCCD is, your role as a teacher is also to, as we've said before, collect evidence of the adjustments that you make. If you remember two things from this episode, it's that NCCD stands for Nationally Consistent Collection of Data, and that you need to document the adjustments that you make in the classroom. Please, please, please do not make an adjustment and then forget to document it. You can do this in your register, or if you might call it the annotations of your programs. You might write it in your daybook, but it should then be transferred to the annotation of your program anyway. Eventually, it will end up in your program. So just go to the program and write down what you have adjusted for which student and on what date. And that is the evidence that you can then give to whichever teacher in your school is in charge. You can say, I did my job.
Yeah. I think daybooks, we've talked a little bit about planners before at one point, but daybooks, I really like ebb and flow on how effectively I use them. And I think I look at some teachers and I'm just absolutely blown away at how consistently and detailedly, that's a word, they keep their daybook. And I think my understanding, as I've been working for a while now, is that people really used to rely on their daybook almost as their register. Whereas I just find it easier, especially now in the day of online learning platforms. Like if I upload a task to Google Classroom, it's got a date stamp on it and a time stamp even. So I could literally write in my program, go back through my Google Classroom and scroll through and record all the dates that I did, all the tasks and all the things. So I think the need for a daybook in that kind of level of detail has maybe declined a little bit, but it is a really appropriate time to point out that if you aren't completing your registers across the year, it does make it really hard for you to document your adjustments well. Different schools, again, will have different expectations of how you go about doing your registers. I've worked in a school before where things had to be color-coded in a certain way. That's not really the case where I am now, but different schools will have different expectations. And it really does make life easier for yourself if you are registering throughout the year. I tend to do my registers at the end of each unit, but I certainly know people and have fallen into the trap myself of doing my register like right at the end of the year before they all have to be finished. And that can add a little bit of stress, and you are just not going to remember everything that you're adjusting for your students, those little on-the-fly decisions. And I guess that's where a daybook can come in handy if you're just making a quick note, dot point, on this day, I made this change for a student.
Last but not least, in this list of roles you have as a teacher in NCCD is to do some moderation with the other quote-unquote stakeholders in the learning context of a particular student, which Sarah already talked about, which will involve various meetings and talking to maybe, if you're in high school, the different teachers that teach that student and all that kind of thing. That is recommended by the NCCD, but not mandatory. However, the fact that they said recommended makes me think they're being passive-aggressive about this and that they want you to do it. So maybe do that.
The NCCD has a lot to talk about. There are a lot of different phases and stages and acronyms to get your head around. But hopefully this episode has helped you to see your role as the classroom teacher is to just understand what the NCCD is and to be making reasonable adjustments for your students and documenting them. If you are doing that, then you are going to breeze through your NCCD reporting season and you can quash any stress or fear that you have when those acronyms are brought up.
So we do hope you've enjoyed this episode. and listening to our rambling, because we love to ramble. And if you feel so inclined, we would love it if you gave us a review on whatever podcast platform you use, because it actually makes it easier for other people to find us. And we want to support as many Australian teachers as possible, which is the whole reason why we started this podcast. So if you could help us out, that would be fantastic.
Bye.